Hello, everyone, and welcome to my lecture, which is entitled Supple Sculptures, Open Mind, on Tapta's Multifaceted Art Practice. My aim is to provide you with a broad overview of the various aspects of Tapta's artistic practice, and you'll notice that I will touch on some of these briefly as they are covered in other lectures presented today, while others, such as Tapta's teaching practice, I will explore in more detail. While exploring Tapta's personal photo archive, comprising just over 100 photographs, many of which are unidentified, undated, and damaged, a particular print caught my eye. It shows a segment from a photographic strip, including a twofold shot of Tapta amidst some of her nodded cord works from the early 1970s. The photo depicts Tapta with a short, modern hairstyle, a simple turtleneck sweater, crossed arms, and one hand elegantly near her face. Her lively gaze alternates between looking directly into the camera and glancing away from it. Likely captured around 1972-1973, in an exhibition space, we witness the artist at the onset of her flourishing artistic career. Regardless of whether the multiple portrait shots were intentional on the part of the photographer or merely a test, the way Tapta stands among her works does provide a hint of the dynamic interaction that she sought to establish between the artwork, the space in which it is presented, and the spectator. To my surprise, the reverse side of the print is marked with a stamp from Paul Pia, a remarkable figure in Belgium's photography history. Not only was she starting in the late 1950s, one of the first women photographers in Belgium with a commercial and artistic photography practice. Between 1974 and 1986, she also ran the first Belgian photo gallery in Antwerp by the name of Fotogalerij Paul Pia. The photographer's stamp on this print leads me to tentatively identify the blonde lady in another photograph from Tapta's archive, dated April the 5th, 1973. This must be Paul Pia, seated next to Tapta in the artist's living room, wrapped in a scarf woven by Tapta, with a bottle of wine and a stack of photo prints on the coffee table, the topmost one revealing a detail from Tapta's piece, The Large Plant, from 1971. What the two women, depicted here in a friendly atmosphere, certainly had in common is that they both wanted to elevate a medium hitherto considered minor art to the status of fine art and transform it into a respected contemporary art form. Photography in the case of Paul Pia, textile in that of Tapta. In addition, they were both important role models and motivators for a younger generation of especially female artists in Belgium. Indeed, from the very beginning of her artistic career in the 1960s, Tapta broke away from the traditional technique of weaving, a craft which, just as in her native Poland, had a long and strong tradition in Belgium, formerly the Southern Netherlands as well, and which she learned in the late 1940s at the La Cambre Art School in Brussels. Possibly influenced by informalism, a dominant pictorial movement in Europe in the 1950s and 1960s, her visual language in textile is predominantly abstract and characterized by free gestures, resulting in organic forms not hindered by preliminary sketches, but inspired by the manipulation of materials. Interestingly, in her first experimental weavings, Tapta already included small pieces of reflective metals or left certain parts open thus creating a play of light and shadow and establishing an early interaction between the artwork and its surroundings, an aspect that she would later elaborate much further. When Tapta made her debut as an artist in the mid-1960s, showcasing her first solo exhibition at Galerie Les Métiers in Brussels in 1966, she was 40 years old and had already led quite an eventful life. Born Maria Irena Boyer in 1926 in Koszan, Poland, she was the middle of three sisters, growing up in the town of her birth, where their father, an engineer, was the director of a sugar factory. Already from an early age, she adopted the name Tapta, as she stated in a 1997 interview. I quote, "My older sister told me that once, as a little girl, I arranged all my toys in a beautiful circle and started to dance between them and sing, 'I'm Tapta, Tapta, Tapta.' The family liked it, and I became Tapta forever." End quote. Besides a pet name from her childhood, Tapta would be her pseudonym during her activities in the resistance movement during World War II, and eventually also her artist name. As Anda Rottenberg has revealed in our book, during the war, Tapta plays an active role as a scout and nurse in Warsaw, where in 1944 she eventually, along with her future husband Krzysztof Kowalski, and thousands of other Polish men and women who participated in the Warsaw Uprising, was rounded up, brought to Germany, and imprisoned in Camp Stalag 4B Zeithamm. Tapta and Krzysztof married in the camp and stayed there until the liberation by the Red Army in April 1945. After that, they decided to emigrate to Belgium, with the scholarship from the Polish Army Fund, Tapta started to study weaving at the École Nationale Supérieure des Arts Visuels de la Cambre in Brussels. Soon after her graduation in 1949, the couple moved to what was then Belgian Congo, now Democratic Republic of the Congo, where Krzysztof worked as an engineer at the shipyard of the colonial transport agency Otraco. During their 10-year stay in Congo, their 3 children were born, Joanna, Michelle, and Eva. Not much is known about her creative activities in Congo. In an interview, Tapta mentioned that she had experimented a bit with a loom she had taken with her, and that she also worked with tulle and burlap, which she dipped in cement to make figures, but then lost her enthusiasm. It is only after the family's return to Belgium in 1960 that Tapta started to truly develop an artistic practice. Remarkably, Tapta seldom, if ever, spoke about any of these events, be it the war, her time as a colonist in Congo, or later the tragic, untimely death of her youngest daughter. Instead, she always seemed to radically look forward, choosing life and art and transforming her memories and traumas into an incredible level of artistic productivity and educational devotion, the latter being an aspect of her practice I will elaborate later on in this lecture. Undoubtedly influenced by her life experiences, her visual language features fluid yet heavy forms, often on a monumental scale. These forms emanate strength and encourage the viewer not only to observe, but to physically interact with them, as well as engage with other visitors and the surrounding environment. Tapta was aiming for more than sole observation. She was calling for active participation. When you've been through some really powerful experiences, You have high expectations and don't want to produce lukewarm products, she confided to Michel Botson in 1994. Supple sculptures. In 1969, Tapta showed her semi-transparent curtain-like hanging tripartite orange at the 4th Lausanne International Tapestry Biennial. You can see the work here hanging in the back of Tapta's home interior. It's actually the only existing color image of the work, as far as we know. There, at the Lausanne Biennial, she was introduced to the works of related artists like Magdalena Abakanovic, Jagoda Buic, Elsie Gjauke, and Sheila Hicks. This encounter inspired her to further pursue her chosen path of experimenting with textile materials and exploring the spatial capacities of the medium. And so, in the 1970s, Tapta really got into her stride. She started making large works with sisal, which she ambiguously designated as sauvage, savage, or wild, measuring up to 300 centimeters, which can be hung against the wall or freely in the space. She also created a series of plant forms, formes végétales, large organic shapes in which woven parts hang in the space, are sewn into three-dimensional volumes and are combined with knotted ropes. During the same period, she produced three-dimensional sculptures made entirely out of self-made or custom-made wool or cotton cords, such as the 1973 cocoons, which invite the viewer to touch the sculptures and walk around them. This activation of the spectator is continued even more radically in large installations into which visitors can actually enter. These impressive environments, such as hanging seats, tent for chatting, flexible place, a seat to suspend time, and two soft columns, or forms for a flexible space, are made of cords sewn together into supple planes or modules that are hanging down from the ceiling. With these structures, Tapta refers to the earliest use of textile materials by humankind and brings it into the exhibition space. Both open and secure, they serve as resting and meeting places where, alone or together with acquaintances or strangers, one can pause, be quiet, or engage in a conversation. As Tapta put it herself, these environments and facilitate dialogue and conversation. They create a favorable climate for exchanges between persons and for intimacy, a quality I have observed on many occasions during exhibitions. These works, all produced in her home studio in Uccle in Belgium, were immediately shown at the then leading contemporary art galleries in Belgium. Richard Vonke in Ghent, Contour in Brussels, De Zwarte Panther in Antwerp, among others. And in two institutional solo exhibitions at St. Peter's Abdij in Ghent in 1973 and the Palais des Beaux-Arts in Brussels in 1975. Tapta also participated in local group exhibitions like the Bruges Triennial in 1974, next to international group exhibitions of textile art in Madrid, Grenoble, Łódź, London, and Cannes. These exhibitions were often followed by acquisitions by public institutions. This short exhibition history, including forums for contemporary art and textile art, reflects the hybridity of the fiber medium between fine arts and crafts. A hybridity that Tapta seems to fully embrace. for certainly until the late 1970s, in parallel to creating unconventional, supple sculptures, she continued to weave, making scarves and ponchos for herself, friends, and acquaintances, which she labeled handwoven by Tapta, tissé main par Tapta. That she does not shy away from more applied aspects of the textile medium is also proven by the seating furniture that she makes for her own home, or, for example, that of the Brussels architect Simone Gillissen-Hoa. Or the series of works titled Flexible Horizons from 1976-77, which are somewhere between autonomous artworks and folding screens, whose shape the user can modify. All these works demonstrate the artist's broad perspective on the nature of art, its potential functions, and its integration into our lives, refusing the hermetic modernist definition of art. Rather than being isolated, art is proposed as intertwined with and enriching our everyday experiences, fulfilling a connecting role. I do not believe a work of art should only be viewed. My work calls for touching and daily use, as Tapta wrote in 1985. This tactile experience of her work is also made explicit in a couple of outdoor installations that Tapta created especially for children. In addition to the construction of large environments, I became interested in the relationships children can have with flexible objects, knots on which they can climb, creepers from which they can swing, she explained. Right after the plant sculptures she had created with woven parts and knotted ropes for inside spaces, Tapta went outside and made several rope installations in trees. These playful structures include lianas for free children, which she made for the exhibition Sculpture Nature in Chimay in Belgium in 1973. Plant structure made for Midzomerforum Assenede in Belgium in 1975, and organic textile structure from 1975. Appropriating both the natural lianas and fishing nets she had seen in Congo 2 decades before, and the classic climbing tools in Western children's playgrounds, the artist here established a close connection or hybridity between art and nature, and between art and life. Because of these characteristics, Tapta's works, which she called flexible or supple sculptures, sculpture souple, occupy a rather unique place among or at the intersection of several contemporary art movements. On the one hand, like other fiber artists of the period, she took textile art beyond the categories of ornament and craft. On the other hand, similar to artists within post-minimal art and conceptual art, she redefined traditional notions of sculpture. Her sculptures do not stand but hang. They are not hard and static, but soft and flexible. The socially connecting aspect, in turn, is something we find, for example, in works by artists of the Brazilian neo-concrete movement. With them, Tapta was aiming to share a sensitivity to engaging the viewer in and harnessing art's unifying potential. Bringing all of these elements together, Tapta's works, including the environments, appear as a gestalt, a self-contained perceivable form, while functioning equally well as a refuge or meeting place. The belief that art and the artist has a social role to play is also reflected in Tapta's commitment as a teacher. In 1976, she was asked by the then director Robert Louis Delvoye to head a studio at La Combre in Brussels, a calling Tapta accepted and to which she devoted herself until 1990. Throughout this period, she renamed the workshop several times, from textile design to textile creation, then textile sculpture, and finally supple sculpture. Regardless of these designations, her teaching invariably stood for encouraging students to develop an open and critical mind rather than instructing them in particular techniques. She would go outside the classroom, take them to exhibitions, theater performances, and go see works of art integrated into architecture. My essential purpose as a teacher is to prompt students to create, to use their imagination, and to develop their judgment and sense of observation, she said. According to Anne-Veronica Janssens, who was one of Tapta's first students and later on, between 79 and 87, together with Monica Droste, also her assistant, Tapta's educational approach was radical, but rather intuitive than theoretical. Her incessant curiosity was especially inspiring to her students. An interesting aspect of her pedagogical approach is that she initiated co-creation projects with her students, which her students would work on in group next to their individual practice. Some of these projects seem to build on the outdoor structures that Tapta realized herself between 73 and 75, right before she started teaching. The idea was to realize an installation together that serves a public purpose, meanwhile learning how to deal with urban restrictions, desires of the users, technical challenges, and safety issues. In 1978, for example, Tapta and her students worked on a project for the Marolles district in Brussels, where they were to create a play area on a sloping street. They conceived an iron cage structure measuring 4.5 meters in all 3 dimensions, taking the shape of a woman, and give it the title the Marolienne, La Marolienne. Instead, inside this structure, they wanted to hang a system of interconnected nets for kids to climb in. In the end, the project couldn't be realized due to a lack of funding. The next year, Tapta students did realize a spontaneous structure within the exhibition Tapisserie d'aujourd'hui at Château Malo near Brussels. The assignment was to create a contemporary textile work that at the same time could serve as a playground for children. The eventual installation consisted of 2 nets hanging in the trees and tethered to the ground. It took the students 2 weeks to make the largest net, measuring 17 meters, which had to be done on-site in the grass using self-invented and self-made wooden tools. Another example of a co-creation project that Tapta initiated was Inflatable Structure, made in the context of Interieur 80, the International Fair for Residential Creativity in Kortrijk in 1980. 600 square meters of sailcloth were stretched over 741 meters of bent iron bars with 600 meters of rope and 1,000 pegs. Visitors could crawl on all fours through the light tunnel. In all of these projects, and corresponding to Tapta's own oeuvre, The emphasis is on the interaction between the hands and the materials, between the different creators, and between the artwork and its users. Besides teaching at La Cambre, starting in 1980, Tapta also coordinated the structure studio of the Fondation de la Tapisserie in Tournai in Belgium, which later became TAMAT. This was a sort of artist residency program in which, for example, Edith de Kind participated. Both of Tapta's engagements at La Cambre and Tournai show her deep commitment to mentoring and to encouraging young creators. For Tapta, however, the effect of education was reciprocal. In a 1982 interview, she emphasized the importance of the constant interaction between her and the students, through which she also questioned herself and her own practice. Around 1980, Tapta's practice took a new direction. Expanding upon her previous endeavors with environments and playful in situ works in nature, she embarked on two distinct paths. Further developing architectural installations using quartz and experimenting with a novel material, neoprene. Both testify to an ever-increasing interaction between artwork and environments. With installations like chromatic tension in a sports complex in Butgenbach in Belgium and tension in a neoclassical chapel in Aix-en-Provence in France, Tapta began to intervene more directly in architectural space. In these works, bundles of parallel cords were stretched between different architectural elements and traversed the space. They brought color to the interior and created a new dynamism, as she called it, causing the viewer to experience the space very differently. In 1985, she created a similar installation for the metro station Weewede in Brussels, entitled Flexible Vaults, now using cables instead of cords. About this work, she noted, "This type of project fascinates me more than any other. It enables me to influence an architectural space, leaving the museum and integrating myself into the daily life of the city." Already with the 1970s rope environments, but certainly here with the tension series, Tapta clearly surpassed the modest scale of domestic craft. The same holds true for the large black sculptures she was making from 1981 onwards, further developing the concept of flexible sculpture, but with a different approach. She started using neoprene, a synthetic rubber primarily utilized in industrial applications such as conveyor belts. The first piece in this new body of work, which she would continue to develop until her death in 1997, is Elastic Horizon, a two-part black sculpture comprised of rubber leaves fastened together with prominent screws and bolts. Planted down in the grass, it appears as an element that is at once alien to the natural landscape and blends harmoniously into it. Passers-by can walk along it or sit down and lean against it to rest. Tapta's explanation for the switch to synthetic rubber was, on the one hand, that she wanted to completely abandon the decorative aspect that she believed fabric always has, and on the other, her fascination with industrial materials and spaces, which she had held since childhood. The new material is simultaneously soft and rigid, which made the transition from fabric natural. She also stated that she felt the need to express herself more powerfully. The work she presented at the 10th International Tapestry Biennial in Lausanne in 1981 attests to this. A large rubber curtain entitled Elastic Structure. Constructed from strips of thick synthetic rubber secured with bolts spanning 4.5 by 5.5 meters, it is a massive yet fluid black surface, a flexible wall. Tired of the discussions about is this tapestry or art, this work was Tapta's farewell to the Lausanne Biennial and the domain of textile art. From then on, she concentrated on her industrial-looking rubber sculptures, which were created by cutting neoprene sheets into geometrical shapes and reassembling them using screws, bolts, and hinges. Because of their non-decorative poor materials, these sculptures focus strongly on the relationship between the artwork and the architectural or natural environment, and on how it guides the viewer through the environment. The works were conceived for a particular space, indoors or outdoors, and so their form is determined by the space. But at the same time, the sculptures also mold space, which these rubber sheets, Tapta seem to be sculpting space itself. By doing so, she was tying into constructivism, as evidenced by a quote from Naum Gabo that she included in one of the project proposals for the labyrinth-like work Place of Transition for the Museum of Contemporary Art in Antwerp. The quote includes, "In our sculpture, space is no longer a logical abstraction or transcendental idea. It has become a malleable material element. It has become a reality." As she did for her large court sculptures, Tapta also prepared her neoprene installations through scale models. Instead of making sketches on paper, she started from the material itself and then manipulated it. This act of manipulation is particularly important for her, and at times she entrusted it to the visitor. For instance, in addition to monumental installations, she also created smaller sculptures consisting of neoprene surfaces attached to each other by hinges, allowing spectators to change the shape according to their wishes. So, where the sense of touch, so evident in the textile works of the 1970s, seemed to have disappeared in the large neoprene installations, it nonetheless returned. Throughout her entire oeuvre, Tapta stressed the idea of thinking through feeling, and remained committed to the dynamic interaction between artwork, environment, and spectator. To conclude, Open Mind is the title of one of Tapta's last artworks, a monumental sculpture she designed in 1997 together with her daughter, the architect Joanna Wirusz-Kowalski, for a roundabout in the Brussels North district. It illustrates the last phase of Tapta's oeuvre, in which she explored the effect of light in her sculptures by adding reflecting water surfaces, shiny materials like stainless steel, for example, and sometimes light projections. The open mind concept indeed fully characterizes Tapta. Her open vision on art and life shaped her multifaceted practice, consisting of creating autonomous artworks, applied objects such as garments and furniture, and works situated somewhere in between the two, as well as teaching and initiating collaborative projects. The power of her oeuvre undoubtedly lies in the interconnection between all of these elements, and most importantly, in the connection between artwork, space, and viewer participants. Thank you.